Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I have for you a ghost fiction horror novel entitled Stolen Tongues by author Felix Blackwell. And Felix Blackwell is actually an independent author that is doing pretty well for himself. Currently, Stolen Tongues is ranked at about 4,400 on Amazon's bestseller list, and the book currently has over 6,900 reviews. So that is pretty impressive for an independent author, and I aspire to be like Blackwell one day when I grow up. So one of the things I wanted to address about Stolen Tongues before I begin my review is this book was suggested to me by one of my viewers by the name of KCKC7978 when I put out my horror novel video about 2 weeks ago. And this book was suggested to me because I asked for comments on other horror novels that other people had read that I might be interested in. And the thing about Stolen Tongues is it is listed as a ghost fiction horror novel, but unfortunately I did not find Stolen Tongues to be scary at all, which has started me thinking that maybe the definition of horror has changed over the years. So I went online to Webster's.com to look up the definition of horror, and it states that horror is the painful and intense fear of dread or dismay. So that being said, it means that when I read a horror novel, I should experience some overly intense feeling of fear or dread or dismay when I am reading this book. And lately, I have not been experiencing any fear when reading these so-called horror books. And the only dread that I have been experiencing is the dread of taking time away from my life reading these novels. But anyways, that is of course my opinion. Other people have read this book and found it to be a bit scary. But for me, I felt like the book could have been scary, but there was really no build up of suspense where it left you anxious, wanting to know what was going to happen next. For me, it was just a retelling of events where I was underwhelmed. In the story Stolen Tongues, we meet the main character by the name of Felix and his fiancée Faye. And Felix and Faye have just gotten engaged, and Faye's parents have given them the keys to their cabins in the mountains. But unfortunately, they end up getting snowbound within the cabin, and they're not able to reach anyone on the outside. There are long periods where their phones aren't working and they can't get in contact with anyone. And while there, they began feeling a very sinister presence. They began feeling this dark presence that is actually walking around the cabin. And they begin to hear these voices of children singing. And they hear voices of people chanting strange sentences that don't make sense to them. And of course, with all this going on, they want to leave, but they can't, because of course they are snowbound, and there are a few times when they are able to reach the ranger at the foot of the mountain, but no one is able to reach them in a reasonable time. And the thing is that with all this going on, Faye is also a sleepwalker, and she talks in her sleep. And as the time goes on, Faye is starting to have a conversation with someone in her sleep, and this person or this thing is wanting information from her. And as she tries to fight it, the things that are surrounding them are becoming stronger. The things that are trying to get into the house and get to them at night is becoming stronger, and they're fearing for their life. And as they make their way out of the cabin in the daytime, they find this gigantic dream catcher that's set out in the woods, and the dream catcher is made up of hair and human bones, and they're not really sure if they should remove it or leave it there because they don't know what might happen if they touch it. So eventually the couple is able to make their way down from the mountain. They are rescued, but unfortunately this dark sinister presence makes its way back to them, back to California where they live. And Faye is still talking to someone in her sleep, and her sleepwalking is getting worse to the point where she is appearing as if she's being controlled by something. And there are times when Felix can look out his window and see this dark presence lurking outside in a meadow that is across from where they live. And as Felix begins to do more research into what is going on, he finds out that there is this presence that exists. It's kind of like The Outsiders from Stephen King's novel, where this thing kind of lives in an alternate universe, but it feeds off of other people. It feeds off of young children. And we find out that this thing has attached itself to Faye since she was a young child, when she first went off to the mountains where her parents were. They used to vacation. And so the rest of the story focuses on Felix and the research that he does, trying to find out what this thing is that's attached itself to his fiance. And we find out that it is something that exists within the Native American folklore. However, there is either no one alive that really has any information on this entity, or the elders within the community aren't speaking about it. So eventually Felix and Faye have to figure out on their own how to defeat this entity. And so I had a few issues with this novel. The first one being which we find out at the beginning of the book that this is not Felix and Faye's first time encountering a dark entity when they have stayed in a cabin in the woods. The first time they have this encounter is when they are pet sitting for some friends of theirs that are off on their honeymoon. They are in the woods and this dark, sinister entity has made its way inside the house. But at this time, they're not snowed in. They are able to leave and get away. And so my thing is, if I have gone off to a cabin in the woods and I have experienced this dark presence, there is no way I am ever staying in a cabin in the woods ever again. I don't care if you paid me to do it. I'm not going. I'm not going to stay in anything that resembles a cabin. I mean, I'm not going to Great Wolf Lodge. It's just not happening. And my second issue with this novel is when this entity is controlling Faye when she's sleepwalking at night, she's doing some really crazy things. She's crawling around the floor. She's mumbling crazy things. She's pointing down at the bottom of the stairs saying something's there. She's moving around in this robotic type motions where her body is stiff, but her hands are elongated, and she's just doing some crazy thing. And my thought is, Felix is taking her to these medical professionals and he's telling people how she is acting. But of course, nobody is really taking him seriously. And my thought is, if my fiance was acting weird and doing some pretty crazy things, I would be recording some of these things. I would want somebody to see what I'm seeing so people aren't thinking I'm out of my mind. And so that was one of the things, you know, with technology today, you're not filming this. I mean, I want somebody to see what I'm seeing so they can help me. If you're really looking for help, record this stuff, okay? And as I said, I did not feel like the story should have been categorized as horror, because there wasn't any point in the story where I felt anxious for any of the characters. Even with all the stuff that was going on, I wasn't worried for any of the characters. It was just, as I said, a retelling of events that didn't make me feel anxious. I wanted to be scared. If you read the blurb, it makes you want to read the book. But for me, the blurb was better than the book. You know, the trailer was better than the movie. For me, the book just could have been so much better. And I wish that it was. I wish that I was able to have my heart racing when all these crazy events were happening, when the dark, sinister presence was standing outside of the window, when Faye was going around writing the backward fives on the glass. I wanted it to be so much more than it actually was. And because I was disappointed that this was not a horror novel, I end up giving the story 3 stars. I am fascinated by all the research that the author put in when developing this novel. There's a lot of background information on Native Americans, and some of it is made up because the author did not want to offend anyone. But the story the development of the story, you can tell that there was a lot that went into it. And so because of that, I think the story does deserve at least 3 stars. But as far as it being ghost fiction and horror, for me, it failed on that level. So I was not able to go any higher than 3 stars. But someone else out there, a lot of people have loved this book. It has a high rating on Amazon, and it has, as I said, over 6,000 reviews. So you may want to pick up a copy. You may be scared. For me, it might take a little bit more than others to be scared. It might just be something I'm lacking, something I'm needing. But anyways, that concludes today's review. Thank you guys again for sticking around. And until next time, you guys take care, stay safe, and try to do something nice for a stranger so we can all do our part to make this world a better place.